Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one. Okay, so last week we talked about the Avid, the TDS, and the lead-based paint. We went through those, the importance of the time periods for you guys, not only as the listing agents for it, but as buyer's agents, to be respectful of that time, to be conscious of that time, to understand the things that need to be done in those time periods. We talked about all of that stuff last week. This week we're going to continue with a couple other disclosures that we're going to talk about. We probably won't need to go the entire hour, so there'll be plenty of time at the end for questions if you guys have anything. But any questions about what we talked about last week before I start with our disclosures this week? So any questions about the TDS or the SPQ? I mean, we need to do the SPQ, TDS or Avid or lead-based paint. Nope. All right. Well, let me share my screen with you guys. So you should be looking at right now the form called the Solar Advisor and Questionnaire, or CAR Form Solar. This is for sellers that have solar panels and you're selling the solar panels. This is an advisory and a questionnaire. It falls under the disclosures because it's required to be delivered when you're selling a property with solar panels. So it's not going to be required with everything, obviously. But let's look at this form. So solar ownership. Solar power systems may be owned outright, owned with financing, owned with a lien or security interest on the real property, or leased. Many property owners who believe that they own their solar power system may not have free and clear ownership of that system. Ownership could be subject to a note and deed of trust issued when a solar power system was financed, or a UCC-1 financing statement filed with the California Secretary of State. Financing of solar power systems may also be secured by an assessment against the real property that is collected through additional property tax payments for the period of financing, e.g., right, example, HERO or PACE programs. Because a seller's property tax statement will reference the solar lien, sellers may not remember the lien or consider it as a separate lien. Nonetheless, it should be disclosed. Some owners obtain private lending to purchase a solar power system that is not secured by real property or panels or other equipment attached to it. If the seller is intending for these private loans to be paid off as part of the sale, terms may need to be added into the agreement to address the situation. So by default, it isn't that the seller is going to pay off the solar panels or any other leased or liened items. The default is that there is, just like with any other contingency, the buyer has the right to investigate, look through the paperwork, decide or find out if they can qualify for that transfer. And if they can't, at the end of the 17 days, they can, during that 17 days, they can cancel if they can't qualify for that lien. The sellers can choose to pay those off, but that's also some information that you have to get from the company that's holding on to those liens or those leases, things like that they can or can't be paid off. The HERO and PACE programs, they have to be transferred over. Solar liens, power purchase agreements, and other solar leases. Many solar power systems are not owned, but instead are leased. While a lease system typically has a fixed or scheduled monthly payment, other systems may have a power purchase agreement requiring the purchase of all or a portion of the solar power generated at an agreed contractual rate from the solar company, with an ability to sell any excess energy to the electrical provider. In accordance with systems governing regulatory scheme, payments under such an agreement can vary depending on the amount of energy created and used. Even solar power systems that are leased may have security interests attached, such as a UCC-1 or a fixture filing recorded in the county where the property is located. In some cases, the lender or lien holder for solar power systems may allow a buyer to assume the existing loan and may agree to allow their solar lien to subordinate to or become secondary to a new purchase loan. However, in many cases, the holder of the security interest will not release the priority of its security interest, which means that the solar loan must either be paid off when the property is sold, or that any buyer must purchase without obtaining new financing. Where there is a solar lease, a buyer may be permitted to assume the terms of a solar lease, but only with the approval of the solar company. For lease systems, there may be a provision enabling the purchase of solar equipment prior to the end of the lease term, or a provision allowing the termination of the lease at cost with no retained ownership of the solar equipment. There may also be a clause enabling the purchase of the equipment or the termination of the lease without any pre-agreed cost. In those cases, the cost will be an appraised value determined by the solar company. If a solar power system is owned by the seller may have the right to remove the system or its components and install them on another property. If the system has been financed and the financing is secured by a lien on the property or the component parts, the seller should consult with the company about both the effective removal of the system or its components on the lien and the consequence of any damage caused by the removal. So there it's saying, like, look, we've paid for it outright. We could take it with us. Now, remember, taking it with us means I have to make sure that the roof and everything else, excuse me, is in good condition. You can't just take them off, leave holes in the roof, leave it unrepaired. You got to do all that stuff just like you would with any other fixtures that you remove. You can't just leave the damage. But there it's saying that some of these don't allow you to pay them off, right? If there's a lien on the property, it may have to stay even if you do pay it off. Some of them allow you to assume the lease, some of them don't. So this is why it's important that when you start this process of dealing with a listing that has solar panels, that you start this stuff right from the beginning, that you make sure that with the rest of your disclosures, you include this. Because the more information you have from the beginning and being able to know whether or not you're going to have to pay it off, whether or not it can be transferred, all that stuff, you can start that from very early in the transaction when you find a buyer who's willing to purchase the property. All parties are advised that the multiple listing service and other advertisements that are used to list or market the property for sale and are not contractual agreements. So basically what they're going to say is, if I put in the MLS that it's coming with the solar panels, or I put on a flyer that it's coming with the solar panels, or on my website, anything other than the disclosures or contractual agreement, like we've referenced in a contract, you can't rely on those as buyer that you're going to be able to assume that lease or lien and that they're going to stay. Or you can't assume that the process is going to be what was advertised. And that's like anything else. Anything advertised in the MLS is non-binding. It's only what's in between the boundaries of the RPA and amendments and addendums and disclosures that go along with it. Okay. Purchase, contract, and transfer issues. The Sierra purchase agreement includes a contingency for the review of leased or lien items in the system in order for the buyer to review any agreements or documents related to any solar power system and to properly evaluate all of the present and future terms and conditions, including the cost of accepting the existing solar power system. The default language provides that the system is being transferred and the buyer has a contingency to determine whether the buyer is willing or able to assume any lease, lien, or other agreement. If the solar power system is not intended to be transferred to the property, the contract may need to be modified to address this. Again, just like anything else that's a fixture, because technically this is a fixture at this point, if I don't, as listing agent seller, reference in a counteroffer or purchase agreement that these solar panels are not remaining with the property, then by default, it's saying that they are remaining with the property, and then the contingency kicks in for the buyer, if necessary, to be able to assume a lease or a lien. If they're owned outright by the seller, that means that there is no contingency. It's just that the buyer's going to get them because they are a fixture of the property. So we've got to address it in a purchase agreement like, hey, I'm seller, I own these outright, I'm going to be removing them and taking them to my next property, which I don't know that that's going to happen often, but they could have that opportunity if they own them outright. Okay. This is going to talk about the recommendations and legal advice. Again, what they're going to say basically, and this is where I don't have to read the whole thing, is you can't rely on, I'm not to give you advice on whether it's good or bad for you to have these solar panels. Whether the payment makes sense for the amount of electricity that it's going to save or all of those things, that's them doing their research to determine whether or not it works for them. Now, they have inspectors that are specific for solar, right? The solar photovoltaic system inspector. You could hire somebody that can come in and say, hey, yeah, you know what? In the case of this property, based on the size and all that stuff, it's worth it for you to assume these, and keep these solar panels. again, like any other contingency, if you go through and do your investigations and you find out, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Like the amount that we're paying exceeds the amount it would cost for electricity on the property, because that does happen to some people. You know, they have smaller properties, they pay a lot for the solar panels. Their electricity without the solar panels wouldn't exceed the cost of the lien or the lease payment that they're, you know, the financing payment that they're making. So again, if that's something that's a concern to the buyers, they have that 17 days to be able to do that. But they can't rely on our opinion on it, because we don't know, right? We're not privy to how much electricity is generated in a normal, you know, month in that property, and what the costs are going to be normally. All we can ask for that information from the seller and see if it makes sense. Okay, this is the solar questionnaire part of it, which is like an SPQ, right? Are you, the seller, aware of? This is now the seller answering questions in regard to the solar panel system and any leases or liens. So, general solar power systems. Are you, seller, aware of? Approximate age of the solar power system. I would assume that the majority of sellers are going to say yes on this. The name of the installation company, do they or do they not know? Yes or no. Does the solar power system provide power only for a portion of the property? Yes or no. Approximate size of the system, number of panels, kilowatt size, yes or no. Do you know what that is? Whether the system is central inverter or microinverters, I don't know what that means. I don't have solar panels. I don't know what that means. Yes or no. Answer the question. Right? Do they have a battery bank? Does it enable the system run off the grid? Whether any portion of the system is installed anywhere other than the roof? Material facts or information related to the solar power system? Yes or no. They answer those questions. Are you, the seller, aware of any of the following? Yes or no. If they answer yes, then the explanation goes down here in these little sections, in this section here. If there is more to explain than what exists here, we could put that on an addendum. So you would write C addendum right there, and then put all the information on the addendum. Okay. This is now owned solar power systems. If, right, you own it and you're transferring it with the property, are you, the seller, aware of whether the system still has a balance due or any financing? Yes or no. If yes, what is the balance? If yes, is it secured by an interest on title? Yes or no. If yes, is the loan transferable? Is the loan transferable or suable by buyer? Yes or no. See, sometimes the answer, we're not going to know the answer, but that's why it's important for us as the listing agent to tell our sellers from the beginning, hey, we're listing this property with the solar panels. If you're financing it or leasing it, or if you've owned it outright, what is your plan to do with the property? Like, if you own it outright, are you leaving it behind? Does your loan allow for you to transfer it? Yes or no. If it doesn't, then are you prepared to pay it off? Otherwise, we have to find a buyer that can pay it off, because they don't let the buyer assume the lien or the lease. So we have to ask these questions from the beginning. So it's really important when you guys see a house that's like that, as listing agent, you got to be on it, because your sellers are going to be the only one that can really get in touch with the solar company to find out the answers to these questions. Yeah, go ahead, Jesus.
Hi, Kyle. On the Hero programs, it's very likely the owners are going to have to pay off the loan, the balance, because I don't think they can be transferable. They have to be paid off, isn't it?
You're talking about in just in solar panels alone, or are you talking about a specific program?
Solar panels, or actually the windows as well.
Well, Windows, we're not talking about the Windows. We're not talking about Windows here, but yeah, for those Hero and Pace programs, that lien remains on the property, so it either gets paid by the seller or it gets transferred as a lien. Hero and Pace are not payments; they're liens on the property, so they would have to get paid through the escrow if it's a Hero or a Pace program. The majority of solar panels don't fall underneath that normally, so they're either a lease or they're financed to own.
Yes, and in my case right now, I have the solar panels for my client on the windows and the solar panels on the Hero, both of them. So we're forced to pay it off, both of them.
Yes. Yeah, because it's the Hero or Pace, it's a lien. They're not going to let that get transferred. Yeah, but in the ones that are financed, I think that the majority of the people that have the solar panels, they've financed them through one of those companies that went and knocked on their door, right? That they're doing what you guys should be doing as agents. They knocked on the door, they financed it, and they're paying something per month, $200, $300, $400, depending on what it is. And hopefully, that payment that they're making is less than what it would cost them for electricity. I know that's for most people it is, and if it was correct, if it was done correctly, it is. I know sometimes there's some companies that maybe are a little less clear or transparent on their dealings, but that's not for this. So we answer those questions. Yes or no? Are you aware of the leased solar power systems or systems with purchase agreements? Right now, it's again the name of the company with the lease or the power purchase agreement. If yes, what's the name? The year the agreement expires. If yes, what year? The current monthly solar payments. Yes, I'm sure that everybody's going to be yes on these if they're leased. Whether the payments are fixed or vary over the life of the agreement. Whether the lease or power purchase agreement is transferable or assumable by buyer. Whether the solar power system is not owned at the end of the agreement, right? All of these things. That's why it's super important, because we have to provide this. It's important for us as the listing agents to guide our sellers from the very beginning to reach out to the companies that provide them with the service and get all of the answers to these questions. And if it were me, right, and we talked about this a little bit last week, where as sellers, listing agents, we require buyers agents to reduce their time periods for investigations, inspections, right, all the disclosures and things like that. And that's fine. Just if you're going to do stuff like that, then you also be prepared as listing agent, right? I would send all this stuff with my counteroffer. And if it were ultimately something that it would have to be the buyer's responsibility, if that turned out the case, like, hey, listen, we're going to leave these behind, but they got to be paid off, so we want you to pay them. I'm not saying that's going to happen a lot, but if I wanted to do that, I would do that at the very beginning in a counteroffer with, this solar advisory and questionnaire. Give them all the information, give them everything, give them the paperwork, the contact information, everything for the solar company from day one, so that if I'm going to reduce those time periods, it's not going to affect whether or not they have the right to remove their contingencies or not. So just do this stuff early. And it's really important for us to ask those questions and do this stuff early. I talked to an agent the other day, and he said he got an offer where the inspection, investigations, disclosures, all the stuff, the buyers had done it for 7 days. And so I said, yeah, that's cool. Their inspection period is going to be that period of time. I said, but do you have the disclosures ready to send back with your counteroffer? And he goes, oh no, I have to do them. It's really important for us, guys, and seriously, that one of the first things we do prior to selling the property is make sure that all the disclosures are completed. They've answered all the questions. They've done the TDS. They've done the SPQ. We've ordered the NHD report. We've got a copy of the prelim. We've done all that. That should be like day one of what is my service to my seller. So start trying to figure out how do you put that into practice for you guys, that the disclosures are, they're the first thing that we do, other than, put it in the MLS and get the pictures taken and stuff like that. Okay, questions about the solar before I move on? No? All right. So let's look at the SPQ, and I am using the SPQ that is a draft for June, because we're not going to do this disclosure class again probably for a while, and there are some changes that are going to happen to the SPQ come June, and that is for the law changes in July. Again, we'll cover that, but for those of you guys that don't know, the law changes in July are that if you have purchased the property within the last 18 months or sooner, and you've done any kind of modifications to the property, repairs or additions or things like that, you've got to disclose all of those repairs and additions and modifications that you made, in addition to how much you spent on all of those and who was the contractor that completed them. But remember, that's only 18 months or sooner or closer, or less or whatever, 18 months or less. Okay, so even though the disclosing of modifications, additions, repairs, that's always existed. Always existed. So it's not that big of a change, other than this is more to address flippers and investors, the guys that are buying houses, quickly repairing them, and then putting them back on the market for a huge increase in price. This is to basically make sure that everybody's transparent and what did you do in order to increase this value as much as you did. And so they're going to have to do that now, 18 months or sooner or less. Anybody that's had it for more than 18 months, if it was your principal residence for the last 5 years, all you have to do is just disclose the repairs, modifications, and alterations that you made to the property, or additions you made to the property, and that's it. Nothing else. Nothing's changed for people who have lived in the property for more than 18 months. So let's look at this. This form is not a substitute for the real estate transfer disclosure statement. It is used by the seller to provide additional information when a TDS is completed. If a seller is exempt from completing a TDS, seller should complete an exempt seller disclosure, and we're going to look at that after, or may use this form instead. You can use this one, but you're only required to use the ESD, the exempt seller's disclosure, if you're not required to provide a transfer disclosure statement. Now, transfer disclosure statement, the only transactions that are not required to provide a transfer disclosure statement are REOs, trust sales where the successor trustee is selling the property and did not live in the property, or probates. That's it. Those are the only three. Everybody else, I don't care if you bought it yesterday and you're selling it tomorrow, right? You're in that 18-month window. You have to provide a TDS and an SPQ. You don't get to use the ESD. And I've seen transactions in the past where investors who are flipping a property attempt to avoid the transfer disclosure and only use the exempt seller's disclosure because their thought process is, hey, I got this at an auction. I don't know anything about it myself. I can't disclose anything, so I get to use this disclosure. It's not true. I still have to provide these forms. Remember that when we look at a seller property questionnaire or TDS, are you, the seller, aware? If you're not aware, you can say no, that you're not aware, but it doesn't mean you can't provide the form. You still got to provide the form, but you answer the questions honestly. Are you, the seller, aware of, and answer the question yes or no. So let's look at it. You are strongly advised to carefully review the disclosure information advisory CAR form DIA before you complete the seller property questionnaire. All sellers of California real property are required to provide various disclosures, either by contract or by statute or case law. Many disclosures must be made within certain time limits. Timely and thorough disclosures help to reduce dispute and facilitate a smooth sales transaction. It's the truth. The more you can disclose, the better. And I know that listing agents love to put as is in their counteroffers. Unfortunately, the contract already addresses that. It says the property is sold as is in its present physical condition, subject to the disclosures of the seller. Now, we have the right to, as buyers, do inspections and request repairs and do those things, but the as is part is what I disclose and what the property currently is. That's as is. Okay? And so the more that we can disclose, the more that we can answer these questions, the more information that we can provide to the buyers, the more we're leaning into that as is place. And then it even gets better if you're TDS, if I can incorporate maybe a home inspection report from a previous escrow, because that becomes part of my disclosures. And it broadens that as is definition, because now I'm telling you even more about the property. All right, so let's look at this. Seller makes the following disclosures with regard to the real property or manufactured home described as: property address, obviously, parcel number if you have it, situated in, what's the city, and the county of. That's it. Disclosure limitation. The following are representations made by the seller and are not the representation of the agents, if any. Remember, just because there are no agents doesn't mean they're exempt from making these disclosures. That's why it says if any. This disclosure statement is not a warranty of any kind by the seller or any agents and is not a substitute for any inspections or warranties the principals may wish to obtain. This disclosure is not intended to be part of a contract between buyer and seller unless otherwise specified in writing. Broker and any real estate licensee or other person working with or through broker has not verified information provided by seller. A real estate broker is qualified to advise on real estate transactions. If seller or buyer desire legal advice, they should consult an attorney. Okay. Note to seller, the purpose. Here's the purpose of this: to tell the buyer about known material or significant items affecting the value or desirability of the property and help to eliminate misunderstandings about the condition of the property. Perfect. Answer based on actual knowledge and recollection at this time. Something that you do not consider material or significant may be perceived differently by buyer. So it's part of when we start talking about doing these disclosures with our sellers, the idea is that we've got to guide them through this. So one of the things that I like to always say is when we're talking to the seller, remind them to think about their property as if they were going to be buying the property right now. What things, if you were a buyer today walking into this property, would you want to know about your property? It's very straightforward. I did skip over something. If this property is a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, we have to check this box. An SPQ is required for all units. By default, it is saying this SPQ is for all units or it's only for this unit specified in that spot. So, for example, if let's say we have 4 units that we're selling, I have to do an SPQ. If there are 4 separate buildings on the property, then I would suggest that you have at least 4 SPQs because you're going to answer for each specific building. If there is a 4-unit building that is all one building, you could say do one SPQ, which is the exterior of the entire building, and then the interior of one unit. And then you would do an SPQ for each interior of the remaining units. If your units are small enough and you have enough space on the SPQ and you can fit all of the information on one SPQ, it is legal, right? It does satisfy the responsibility for the seller on the seller property questionnaire. Suggestion is that you do at least one for the inside of each unit. Okay, you could do one for the outside of all the units, but at least do one individually for each inside of the unit. Okay, think about what you would want to know if you were buying the property today, right? Just what I talked about when we said we're advising the seller. Read the questions carefully and take your time. If you do not understand how to answer a question or what to disclose or how to make a disclosure in response to a question, whether it's on this form or TDS, you should consult a real estate attorney in California of your choosing. A broker cannot answer the questions for you or advise you on the legal sufficiency of any answers or disclosures you provide. Again, we can't say, oh, if you answer this question this way and this is how you do it, you're totally protected. No, all we can do is continue to remind them is, are you seller aware? If the question asked, if you're not aware, then the answer is no. If you are aware of a material or significant item that is going to affect the value of the property or the desirability of the property, then you need to say yes and explain what that is. Okay? Note to buyer. To give you more information about known material significant items affecting the value or desirability of the property and help to eliminate misunderstandings about the condition of the property. Something that may be material significant to you may not be perceived the same way by the seller. Again, it's an opinion. That's why I always like to say, think about it as if you were going to buy it, seller, because the buyer has a different view of your property than you do. That's your house. You love it. I get it. Okay. If something is important to you, be sure to put your concerns and questions in writing on the Sierra Form BMI. That is the buyer material issue. So as we get closer to the changes in the way we practice and how we work with buyers, a BMI is going to be pretty much mandatory. Now, buyer material issues, what it does is it allows the buyer to put in writing what is important to them on the purchase. And that's going to be something that you're going to have to do. as part of your buyer consultation as we get closer to as we get into that time where we change how we work with buyers. Okay. Sellers can only disclose what they actually know. Seller may not know about all material or significant items, and that's true. We may not know. Sellers may not know. They don't know everything that's wrong with their property. There's stuff that's happening, and you just don't know. Until it goes bad, you don't know that there's an issue, right? Sellers' disclosures are not a substitute for your own investigations, personal judgments, or common sense. 100%. You can't say, oh, well, they disclosed a lot of stuff on here. We don't need to do a home inspection. Absolutely not. Always you want to still do your own home inspection and all your own investigations on the property. Seller awareness. For each statement below, answer the question, are you seller aware of, by checking either yes or no. A yes answer is appropriate no matter how long ago the item being asked about happened or was documented, unless otherwise specified. Explain any yes answers in the space provided or attach additional comments, and check the paragraph 19. I think that's one of the things that we as agents don't advise our sellers properly on is the time period. We assume that if it didn't happen in the last year or so, we don't need to disclose it. Right? So if I've owned my property for 10 years and 9 years ago I had a major roof leak, but I had it repaired. I did it. I had a roofer come in, did everything with permits. We fixed everything. We took care of it and it's fixed. I should still disclose that even though it is 9 years later, because there is still going to be some stuff left behind from that damage. Right? When we fix the roof, they don't replace the entire structure of the roof. They replace things that need to be replaced, and they leave some stuff in place that is still structurally sound and can be used. And if somebody does a home inspection or does a roofing inspection as part of their investigations, they're going to see that there was damage that came from something, and the roofer is going to call it out. And if we didn't disclose that, yes, there was a major roof leak that was repaired, and here's the information about that repair, they're going to assume that we're hiding something, and it's going to cause issues. So again, there is no time limit on what you have to disclose. And the reason said unless otherwise specified is because there is one thing that they're going to ask for that has a time limit, and we'll get to it in a moment. Okay, so documents. Are you, the seller, aware? Here we go. We're getting into it already. Are you, the seller, aware of any reports, inspections, disclosure, warranties, maintenance recommendations, estimates, studies, surveys, or other documents, whether prepared in the past or present, including any previous transaction, and whether or not seller acted upon them, pertaining to the condition or repair of the property or any improvement on this property in the past, now, or proposed, or easements, encroachments, or boundary disputes affecting the property, whether oral or in writing, and whether or not they're provided by the seller? Yes or no? Do you know about those things? That's it. If you do, then you're going to explain in that space where it says explanation. It's not a lot of space, so you're probably going to have to do an addendum where you're going to have those explanations. Okay? Statutorily or contractually required or related. Are you, seller, aware of, well, in the last 3 years, the death of an occupant on the property upon the property? Yes or no. Note to seller, the manner of death may be a material fact to the buyer and should be disclosed except for a death by HIV or AIDS, right? You can't do that. Discriminatory. I would suggest that the majority of the time you don't have to disclose what they died from unless it was maybe some kind of a violent death, right? Like it was a suicide or murder, God forbid, right? You should disclose that for sure, okay? But if an occupant of the property died upon the property in the last 3 years, you have to answer yes and explain down below. That's the timeline, right? Everything else is there's no timeline, but I only have to disclose in the last 3 years that death. Now, if it was a violent death, if it was, God forbid, a suicide or something like that, the 3 years is out the window. Disclose that if it was 10 years ago. Okay, don't hide that fact, because that's something that's really important that you share with somebody, because if you don't share it, the neighbors will, I'm sure of it, okay? An order of the government health official identify the property as being contaminated by methamphetamine, yes or no, okay? The release of illegal controlled substance on or beneath the property, yes or no, right? Remember, these are all, are we aware of? Yes, Jesus, go ahead.
Right now, we're having a situation where the death of one of the owners happened on the sidewalk in front of the house 4 years ago. We don't have to disclose that, right?
4 years ago?
Killed.
It was killed. Yeah, I would. Absolutely. Somebody was murdered on the sidewalk of your house 4 years ago? Absolutely, you're going to disclose that.
It was on the sidewalk, not inside of the house.
Doesn't matter. It says upon the property, not inside the house. Is the sidewalk upon the property? Look,
I
here's the
assume so.
thing.
Yes.
Yeah, but here's the thing. And the reason I say that, you don't disclose it. And they move in and they go introduce themselves to the neighbors, and the neighbors introduce themselves, and they go, "Oh man, it was so sad when the guy who lived here got shot on the sidewalk out front." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" Now you're gonna get a phone call from the buyer's agent. And the buyers are gonna be upset that they didn't know that somebody got murdered in their front yard. So absolutely, yes, you're gonna disclose it. Yeah, when it comes to stuff like that, if somebody got shot in the front yard or stabbed in the front yard, you're not gonna just follow this 3-year protocol. I'm sorry, I wouldn't, because it's gonna come back. It's gonna come back. Okay. Whether the property is located adjacent to an industrial, all of these things. Remember, when you're going through, you just ask the questions: are you, seller, aware of these things? And that's why it's important that we guide them through it. And we have, like I said, when we were talking about the TDS last week, we look at it and say, okay, I'm going to read off these questions and we're going to discuss it, and you tell me, are you aware of it? Remember, just take your time, think about these things, right? Especially right now, this one is important. Insurance claims affecting the property in the last 5 years. That's important because it's so hard for buyers to get insurance as it is. And if there were claims on the property that we knew about and didn't disclose, and it causes a delay in the insurability for the buyer, they're going to come back and say, well, you knew about this and didn't disclose it to us. So please ask that question. This is new because they're changing things about condos. Any inspection reports on any exterior balconies, stairways, or other elevated elements on buildings within 3 or more units on the property prepared within the last 6 years or 9 years for condominiums. So anything like you have a elevated balcony, something on the outside where people are going to go, because there's been a lot of issues with people being on balconies that collapses, or stairways, or if you have like a patio, right? In the last 6 years, any inspection reports, right, with 3 or more units in the last 6 years, 9 years for condos. That's it. Are you aware of them? Again, if there isn't any, you're not aware of any, then the answer is no. Material facts or defects affecting the property not otherwise disclosed to the buyer. So anything above that, no plumbing issues or whatever that you've already answered, if there's anything besides that you think of that is a material fact or defect affecting the property, you could disclose it right there. Here's where we get to the repairs and alterations. Okay. Any alterations, modifications, replacements, improvements, remodeling, material repairs on the property. That's it. Anything. Has there been any alterations, modifications, replacements, improvements, remodeling, or material repairs on the property, including those from a home warranty claim? That's it. Not in how many years, nothing ever that you can remember. As you are the owner, have you done anything? I know that seems like a daunting task to try to remember any repairs or things that you've done if you've owned a house for a long time, but whatever you can remember, you need to disclose. Okay? Any alterations, modifications, replacements, improvements, remodeling, or material repairs to the property done for the purpose of energy or water efficiency improvement or renewable energy. Again, anything you've done. Have you put in the water conserving fixtures? Have you put in the solar panels? Did you put in energy saving windows? Those kind of things. Ongoing or recurring maintenance on the property. For example, drain or sewer clean out, tree or pest control services. Anything that they're doing constantly. Now, if they have a big giant tree in their front yard and those grow roots through the main lines and it bogs down the sewer lines, if they have people come out regularly to, like, Roto-Rooter or one of those, to come out and do fix the line, anything that they're doing. Hey, do they have the Orkin, right, where they have the little pest control thing that they come out and service it once a year or once every 6 months? If they have that, it's a yes. If they don't, it's a no. Any of the property being painted within the past 12 months. So in the last 12 months, did you do any painting? Outside of 12 months, don't have to reference it, okay? Whether the property was built before 1978. If no, leave 1 and 2 blank. If yes, you got to now answer 1 and 2. So here we go. If it was built before 1978, yes. If yes, whether any renovations, like sanding, cutting, demolition of lead-based paint surfaces started or completed. If no, leave 2 blank. Okay, so no, we didn't do any of that, right? If yes, such renovations done in compliance with the Environmental Protection Agency lead-based paint renovation rule. Again, it's only if you, the seller, are aware. If I don't know, the person who did the work on my property built before 1978, if I don't know that they did it with this EPA lead-based paint removal rule, then the answer is no. That's it. The answer is no. It's not. I'm not saying no, it wasn't done. I'm saying no, I'm not aware if it was done that way. Right? That's the yes or no. So again, you've got to remind your sellers as you're answering these questions. It's not you saying for sure, no, it wasn't done. I'm saying I wasn't aware if it was done that way or not, so I can't say yes. Okay? Next is where that new law comes into place in July. Whether you purchased the property within 18 months of accepting an offer to sell it, yes or no. If yes, have any room additions, structural modifications, or other alterations or repairs, collectively improvements, been performed by a contractor while you have owned the property? Yes or no. If it's yes, if yes, to F1, seller shall provide in the explanation below a list of such improvements and the name and contact information for each contractor who performs services of $500 or more. If yes to F1, seller shall provide an explanation below a list of those improvements for which seller has obtained permits, and seller shall attach copies of those permits to this SPQ. And for those improvements for which seller does not have a permit, seller shall include a statement identifying those improvements and that seller was not provided permits by a third party making the improvement, and the contact information for such third parties from whom the buyer may obtain those permits. That's it. And then you're going to explain it. Remember, that's only for 18 months or less. And if the contractor did it and it was more than $500. Okay? Questions so far? Yes, Jesus, go ahead.
Earlier you mentioned that we have to state how much money we spend on the repair or the remodel. However, it doesn't specify here. It's just that it was over $500 work performed. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, but the language of it originally did say that it had to specify the cost. It's not in here, so my suggestion is, and remember, this is a draft. This law goes into effect in July. These things could change. So just be prepared that you may have to disclose not just that it was over $500, but the actual cost of each repair. But for sure, you have to give them the contractor's name and contact information.
Yes, thank you. Mm-hmm. And now that I'm with the mic, in order to change or modify the debt of the seller, I use my amendment to 16 agreement, right?
No, on this one, you could use an addendum. You don't have to use the amendment. You could use an addendum. It's fine. For making a change to any of the disclosures, you can use an addendum for that.
Okay.
Because that one doesn't need to expire because it's not a change to the actual purchase agreement, like what we agreed on the terms of the purchase. It is just a statement of me telling you, hey, we have to amend this TDS. What you do need to understand, though, is that amendment that you're going to do, the addendum that amends the TDS, is going to reinstate the 5-day right of rescission that come with all of the mandated disclosures, the SPQ, the TDS, the lead-based paint. They get that back. Okay, so if you have a transaction where they've already removed contingencies, let's say, or you've already given them a disclosure and that 5 days has passed, it goes back into effect. So even if they've removed all their contingencies, by changing the disclosure on the disclosure on the death, it could allow them to cancel even if they've removed their contingencies. Okay, so you're going to read each one of these questions and just go through and say, right here, like the solar power systems, we just talked about the solar. So there's a yes. It's always, are you seller aware? That's just the question that has to be answered. And if your seller isn't aware of anything, then you don't have to, then the answer is no. And if it is a yes, then it's an explanation. And if there's no room in this explanation section, then you have to attach an addendum to it. Okay? So again, all the way through, yes or no, are you seller aware? That's the questions that we're going to ask. And it's a lot on the SPQ, but it's important that we're as thorough as possible on here. Okay? any more material facts. It's one more thing, any present or no, past or present. So sign, give it to the buyer. Okay, the listing agents, the buyer's agents don't sign the SPQ, just the TDS. Okay, now finally what I want to show you is the exempt seller's disclosure, which is only required if there is no TDS, right? So you wouldn't do that SPQ. You could if you wanted to, but if you don't have to provide a TDS, you don't have to provide an SPQ, but you do have to provide this form, the ESD, which is the exempt seller's disclosure. Okay? Again, property address, right? City, all that. Is this a duplex, triplex, or fourplex? Check the box. The ESD is required for all units. This one is for all units, or we do individual units. I suggest individual units like we did with the SPQ. Under California law, most sellers of real property containing 1 to 4 units are required to provide a prospective buyers with a completed real estate transfer disclosure statement. Certain sellers are exempt from completing the TDS, but not exempt from making other disclosures. Sellers who are not legally required to complete a TDS can use this form to make other required disclosures, including the disclosure of material facts which they are aware. Non-compliant plumbing fixtures in any single-family or multi-family residential real property before January 1st, 1990 shall be replaced by the property owner with water-conserving plumbing fixtures. That's it. They're just saying that they should be. And you guys can negotiate that in your contracts. The following are representations made by the seller and are not the representations of any of agents, if any. This disclosure statement is not a warranty of any kind, just like the SPQ stated before, right? Again, here we go back to, are you, the seller, aware of any of the following? Explain any yes answers. So it's just like the SPQ, but as you can see, it's much shorter, right? So it's going to only really focus on, if we went back to the SPQ, it's really kind of only focusing on this first section of statutory disclosures, right? As you can see, right, when we go back to this one, when we go back, why don't you come down there? Thank you. When we go back, if you look at, oh, where did I go? Where'd my, sorry, I messed up. Let's close that. Let's close the SPQ. There we go. All right. As you can see, it kind of just mimics that first paragraph of the SPQ, those same questions. Is it an industrial use zone? Did someone die upon the property? Is there any health officials for contaminated with methamphetamine? So it's really just that first paragraph of the SPQ that we're asking people to fill out on the ESD. And then if there's a yes, then you're gonna put your explanation, or you could check off here and say see attached, right? That's it. That's what's gonna happen. So exempt sellers disclosures, remember, are only allowed for properties that are a probate, a trust sale where the successor trustee is selling the property and wasn't an occupant of the property, or an REO. That's it. Probates, REOs, trust sales, that's the only time you can use the exempt seller's disclosure. Okay. So that was really all the disclosures I wanted to go through with you guys. Like, I didn't make the NHD report is a report that we order from a third-party company that handles all those questions. It replaces the NHD statement, which is one of the other mandated disclosures, statutory disclosures. But because we hire a third-party company who's licensed, bonded, and knows the information, we don't have to provide that NHD statement any longer. So, any questions about the disclosures that we went over today? Anything that we went over last week? Anybody have any questions before I let you guys go? And we had a slightly shorter meeting today. Anybody? All right. Well, I appreciate you guys. This will be on YouTube a little bit later today. So if you missed any part of it or you want to revisit it, it'll be there. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for being here. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next week for this. So have a good one. Take care.